Darius Wade was 42 years old, and until that Tuesday evening, he believed his wife loved him. He owned a thriving civil engineering firm. He paid the mortgage on their dream home without complaint. He drove a modest SUV and wore sensible suits, and never once asked her to acknowledge what any of it cost him. And Camille, his wife of 8 years, had decided that made him embarrassing. He came home 40 minutes early that evening to a house that seemed empty. Then he heard her voice drifting from the sitting room. Unguarded, contemptuous. She was on the phone with the man she'd been seeing for 14 months, and she didn't know Darius was standing 12 feet away in the hallway. "He embarrasses me," she said. I settled. She told her lover she'd already arranged for Darius to stay home from the city's most prestigious gala, so she could walk in on another man's arm without the inconvenience of her husband. What Camille didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that Darius had been quietly building a life she had never thought to look at. A Rolls-Royce Ghost he had owned for 7 years and never once shown her. A private holding company worth millions that carried a name she had never heard. And the night she walked into that gala on another man's arm, convinced her husband was home watching television, Darius walked through those same doors in a $50,000 suit, and every head in the room turned, including hers. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The storage facility sat on the east side of the city, sandwiched between a tire shop and a row of shuttered warehouses. No sign out front worth reading. No attendant at the gate after 6. Just a keypad, a rolling door, and rows of numbered units that kept other people's secrets without asking what they were. Darius Wade arrived at 5:47 in the morning. He parked his SUV near the far end of the lot, away from the single working light pole. He did this without thinking about it, the same way he always parked here, the same spot, the same quiet habit. He cut the engine and sat for a moment. The city was not fully awake yet, just the low hum of it, distant, like something breathing in its sleep. He got out. The morning air was cool and carried the faint smell of rain from the night before. He walked to Unit 14, entered the code, and lifted the door. It rose with a soft mechanical groan. Inside, the air was different, climate-controlled, dry, still. A mahogany wardrobe stood along the left wall. His grandfather had built it by hand, dovetailed joints and all, using tools he'd bought piece by piece over the course of a decade. A fireproof safe sat beside it, black and heavy and bolted to the floor, and taking up the center of the unit, stretching nearly wall to wall beneath a fitted gray tarp, was the car. Darius moved to it. He took hold of the tarp near the front and pulled it back just enough. Midnight silver. Even in the low light of the storage unit, the paint had a depth to it. Not flashy, not loud, just a color that absorbed what was around it and gave back something richer. The chrome along the grille caught the fluorescent light and held it. Rolls-Royce Ghost. 7 years old. Fewer than 200 miles on it. He rested his palm flat on the hood. Just for a moment. Not nostalgic, exactly. More like a man checking on something he intends to use soon. Then he pulled the tarp back into place, smoothed it along the edges, and walked out. He lowered the door behind him. He entered the code to lock it. He went back to the SUV and drove home. Darius had not inherited money in the way people usually mean when they say that. What his grandfather, Earl Calloway Wade, left him at 26 was a trust. But the trust was secondary. What he really left him was an understanding. Earl had spent 40 years repairing other people's buildings during the day and quietly buying property at night. Small parcels at first, then larger ones. He never spoke about it publicly. Never drove anything that made people ask questions. The men who employed him spent those same 40 years telling anyone who would listen that Earl Wade was a good worker, a decent man, and nothing more than that. When Earl died, the inventory told a different story. You don't show people what you have, he used to say. You show them what you do. What you have is between you, the Lord, and your accountant. Darius had been living inside that instruction for 16 years. The trust was managed through a private holding company, the Callaway Group, registered under his grandfather's mother's maiden name. No Wade in the title. No easy thread for anyone to pull who didn't already know where to look. Through patient, disciplined investment and a small real estate portfolio he had built and maintained without fanfare, the Callaway Group had grown to just over $4 million. His attorney knew. His accountant knew. Uncle Ray knew. Nobody else. He ran Wade Consulting openly, a civil engineering firm he had started in a rented room above a laundromat, built contract by contract until it stood on its own. That was the version of his life most people saw. Successful, solid, a man who had worked hard and done well. They were not wrong. They were just only looking at part of the picture. Camille was in the kitchen when he got home. She stood at the island in her robe, phone in one hand, coffee in the other, her eyes already moving through the day ahead. She had the particular focus of a woman who organized her mornings around information, emails, schedules, which conversation needed to happen first. She mentioned the Harrington Foundation Gala, the way people mention the weather, a fact of the coming week. Nothing more. It was next Friday. She'd be attending through a hospital donor table. Brett has arranged it, she said, dropping the name with a lightness that had clearly been practiced. He sits on the philanthropic committee. It should be a good evening. Darius poured himself a glass of water. He said he might attend as well. Camille looked up from her phone. She offered a small, apologetic smile, the kind that carries a verdict behind it. I think the tables are fully assigned at this point. It'd be hard to get you in last minute. You know how these things work. He nodded. You're probably right. He was not going to correct her. The gala could not proceed without his signature on the underwriting agreement. It had not proceeded without his signature for 3 years running. But she did not know that, and she had not asked, and there was nothing in her face that suggested the question had ever occurred to her. He filed the moment away carefully. Then he rinsed his glass, set it in the rack, and went to his office. He sat at his desk for a while without opening anything. The room was quiet. Morning light was just beginning to reach the window, thin and pale, falling across the edge of his notebook. He picked up a pen. He opened to a clean page. He wrote one line, slow and even, the way he wrote things he meant to remember. 3rd Tuesday. She has never once asked. He was 40 minutes early because the meeting had been canceled. A client call that fell apart at the last second, which happened sometimes, and Darius had learned years ago not to be bothered by it. He took the long route home, no particular reason, just the quiet of the drive and the radio turned low. He parked in the driveway. The house looked still from the outside, no lights on in front. He took his bag from the passenger seat and let himself in through the front door, setting it down in the foyer with the easy automatic motion of a man who has done this 10,000 times. Then he heard her voice. It came from the sitting room, down the short hallway, through the half-open door at the end. Relaxed, warm, unhurried. It was a voice he recognized but did not often hear, because it was the voice Camille used when she was certain she was alone. No performance in it, no management, just her, unfiltered, talking the way people talk when they believe no one is listening. He stood in the hallway and did not move. Brett, I told you. He's not going. I handled it. I told him the tables were all assigned. He'll stay home, watch some documentary about bridges, and think nothing of it. A pause. Brett's response, inaudible from where Darius stood. Because he embarrasses me. That's why. Her voice dropped half a register, the way it did when she was being serious. I don't know how else to say it. I have spent 8 years managing how people see him in rooms like that. 8 years. He talks about load tolerances at fundraising dinners, Brett. He does not know how to work a room. He doesn't fit. He has never fit. And every time I bring him somewhere that actually matters, I spend the entire night one step behind him, doing damage control. Darius stood very still. The word damage control settled into the hallway air and did not move. "I'm not being cruel," she said. "I'm being honest." Finally, with myself, out loud, "I'm being honest. I was 29 years old, and I was scared, and he was stable, and I settled. That's what I did. I settled, and I have spent years being too proud to say it. But I'm saying it now." A small laugh. Private. The sound of a woman who has put something down that she has been carrying a long time. "Come to the gala with me. Come as my partner. It's my evening. I want to be there with someone who fits." Darius was holding his keys. He had not noticed until this moment that his hand had tightened around them, the teeth pressing lightly into his palm, 4 small points of pressure. He loosened his grip. One breath, then another. "He embarrasses me. He always has." I settled. He turned around. He walked back down the hallway to the front door. Quietly, heel to toe, the way a man walks when he is moving with intention. He opened the door. He stepped out onto the porch for exactly 3 seconds. Then he opened it again, and this time he let it close, the way a man lets a door close when he has just arrived home after a long day. "Camille?" He called it toward the interior of the house, easy and unhurried. Home early. By the time he reached the sitting room, she was standing near the window, phone at her side, her face arranged in the warm and open expression she kept ready for him. Nothing in her posture suggested a thing. She was composed in the practiced way of a woman who had been composing herself for rooms her whole life, and she had had 30 seconds, and 30 seconds was enough. "How was your day?" she asked. He looked at her. She looked back. The same 2 people standing in the same room they had stood in 100 times, and she did not know, not even close to knowing, that everything between them had just shifted in a direction that would not shift back. "Clarifying," he said. She smiled. He smiled back. She asked if he wanted dinner early, and he said sure, whatever she felt like making, and she nodded and moved toward the kitchen, and the evening went on the way evenings go. That night she fell asleep before 10. He lay beside her in the dark, breathing slowly, his eyes on the ceiling. He stayed that way for a long while. Then he got up. He dressed in the dark. He took his keys from the tray on the dresser. He drove across the city to the east side, to the storage facility between the tire shop and the shuttered warehouses. No other cars in the lot. The single working light pole hummed overhead. He unlocked Unit 14. He raised the door. He pulled the tarp off the Ghost completely this time, all the way back, letting it fall, and he stood there and looked at the car in the fluorescent light for a long moment. Then he sat on the hood. He did not cry. He did not say anything out loud. He just sat in the dark and the dry, still air and thought about what his grandfather had built, while the men who employed him told everyone within earshot that Earl Wade would never be anything more than what they could see. He thought about what it meant to be called a limitation by the one person who was supposed to know your full weight. He sat there until the thinking was finished, and what was left was not grief, but something harder and cleaner, and entirely without doubt. He took out his phone. He opened his messages. He texted Petra Okafor first. "Morning. Early. Bring coffee. Don't ask yet." Then he opened a new message to Cecilia Vance, chair of the Harrington Foundation, and typed, "Cecilia, confirming I'll attend the gala in person this year. Looking forward to it." He sent both. He put the phone in his pocket. He sat on the hood of the Ghost for another minute, just sitting. Then he stood, pulled the tarp back into place along the edges, and walked out. Petra was already there when he arrived. 6:15 in the morning. The sky outside still dark at the edges, and she was sitting on the steps of the Wade Consulting office, with 2 coffees and the expression of a woman who had not slept well. She handed him one without a word. He took it. He unlocked the door, and they went inside and sat down across from each other at the conference table with the overhead lights still off and only the lamp in the corner on. And he told her everything. He told it the way he told hard things, in order, without editorializing. The phone call first. Her exact words, as close to verbatim as he could get them, which was very close, because he had replayed them enough times in the past 24 hours that they had settled into him like load data. He embarrasses me. I settled. Come to the Gala with me. Then Brett's name. Then the receipt. He slid it across the table. The Meridian Hotel. 11 weeks ago. A charge he'd noticed on a joint account statement and filed without conclusion because one charge is not a pattern, and he had not wanted to be the kind of man who builds a case on a single number. But one charge plus a phone call is a different thing entirely. One charge plus a phone call plus a man's name repeated in the practiced, casual way of someone who has said it many times in private. That was a complete picture. He had known it the moment he stood in the hallway and heard her voice. Petra listened to all of it without interrupting. She held her coffee in both hands and watched him talk, and her face was very still. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she set her cup down. "I need to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to hear it before I say it's something I should have told you 8 months ago." He looked at her. "Last spring, I was at Caruso's, the one on Del Mar. Client dinner, separate side of the restaurant." She paused. "I saw Camille. She was with a man I didn't recognize. They were at a corner table, and their hands were together across it." Another pause. "I didn't say anything to you because I wasn't certain. I told myself I wasn't certain, and I let that be enough of a reason." She looked at him steadily, not looking away from it. "I'm sorry, Darius." He held her gaze. He thought about what 8 months might have cost him, and then he set that thought aside deliberately, the way you set aside a calculation that doesn't change the structure of what you're building now. "I need your energy forward," he said, "not backward. You understand?" She nodded once. Firm. "What do you need?" 1 week. Your network. And your silence. "You have all 3, she said. No hesitation. Not even close to hesitation. He called his attorney at 2:15 that afternoon from his office with the door closed. Marcus Webb had been his attorney for 9 years, a methodical, unshowy man who had drafted the Callaway Group's original operating agreement on a Tuesday in November and never asked a question that wasn't necessary. Darius gave him the outline. Not everything, not yet. Just enough to begin. Marcus said he'd have the preliminary documentation ready by end of week. He asked if Darius had a timeline in mind. "I'll call you Friday," Darius said. "I'll be ready," Marcus said. And that was the whole conversation. An hour later, he called the stylist Petra had texted him. A man named Vincent, who worked out of a private studio in the Meridian district and dressed CEOs and professional athletes and, apparently, anyone Petra Okafor vouched for personally. The call lasted 4 minutes. An appointment was made for Thursday morning. Vincent asked one question about the occasion. Darius told him it was a formal evening event. A gala. He said he wanted something that didn't announce itself. Vincent said he understood exactly, and Darius believed him. Uncle Ray's house smelled like coffee and wood smoke, same as it always had. Same as it had when Darius was 17 and showing up on this porch after his father left, and Ray opened the door without making a thing of it. Darius sat at the kitchen table and laid the whole story out. The storage unit, the phone call, Brett's name, the receipt, Petra's restaurant, Marcus, the gala, all of it. and Ray sat across from him with his hands folded on the table and did not make a sound until Darius was finished. The kitchen was quiet. Ray looked at him for a moment. "You still got Unit 14? "Yes." Uncle Ray nodded slowly. Something moved across his face that was not quite a smile and not quite something else, but landed in the space between the two with a weight that felt like years of patience finally being permitted to become something else. "Then we've got everything we need," he said. Darius looked at his uncle across the kitchen table. He exhaled, not dramatically, just the way a man exhales when he has been holding something for a long time and has finally told the right person about it. "I'd like you to come with me," Darius said. "To the Gala." Ray's chin lifted slightly. "I'll press my suit." The rest of the week was ordinary on the surface. He made dinner on Tuesday and Thursday. He asked how her day was, and listened to the answers. He moved through their shared space without friction, without distance, with the same warm and easy presence he had always brought to their home, and Camille received it the way she always had, as simple confirmation that everything was fine, that nothing had changed, that the man across the table from her was exactly what she had assessed him to be. She bought a gown on Wednesday, deep burgundy. She showed it to him, and he said it was beautiful because it was, and because telling her the truth in the small things cost him nothing now. Thursday evening she mentioned, with light and practiced ease, that she'd be home late from the gala. Committee obligations, post-event debrief, the usual end-of-night formalities. She said it with the fluency of someone who had prepared the sentence and was delivering it naturally. He told her he understood completely. He meant it in every direction. The night before the gala, he drove to the east side after 10 o'clock. The storage lot was empty, and the single overhead light buzzed in the way it always did. He unlocked Unit 14. He raised the door. He pulled the tarp all the way off and let it pool on the concrete floor. He got in. The interior smelled like leather and thyme, and the faint trace of the cedar blocks he'd placed along the floor mat 7 years ago and never removed. He adjusted the seat out of habit. He rested his hands on the wheel. Then he turned the key. The Ghost started on the first try. The engine settled into a low, even idle, deep and steady and entirely without effort, like something that had simply been waiting with patience and no doubt about whether the moment would come. He sat in the storage unit and listened to it run. The venue was everything the Harrington Foundation knew how to do. Warm light came down from chandeliers that were old enough to be elegant and well-maintained enough to say that someone cared. The tables were dressed in cream and gold. The flowers were tall and uncluttered. The room had the particular hum of people who understood they were somewhere that mattered and were comfortable belonging to it. Not excited, just settled. The way people are settled when a room confirms what they already believed about themselves. Camille moved through it beautifully. She knew how to enter a room like this. She knew the pace, the posture, the precise warmth of a smile that said, "I'm glad to be here," without saying, "I needed to be here." She touched Brett's arm lightly as they were shown to the table. A donor table near the front, close to the podium. The kind of positioning that told you something about the guest, without requiring them to say it themselves. She made introductions with ease. A hospital board member she had worked with for years. A city councilwoman whose charity overlapped with the foundation's grant recipients. A commercial developer Brett knew from a deal 2 years prior. She moved through names and faces and handshakes with the practiced fluency of someone who had spent years learning exactly how to belong to rooms like this one. Brett held his glass and smiled and said the right things. He was good at it. He looked the part. Tuxedo clean and well-fitted, posture easy, handshake firm. He had the particular confidence of a man who has decided in advance that a room is his and has walked into it already comfortable with that conclusion. They were seated. More introductions. Servers moved between tables with trays of champagne. The cocktail hour was warm and unhurried, And Camille was exactly where she had spent years wanting to be. And she was there with exactly who she had chosen. And the evening felt like confirmation. She had earned this. That was what she believed, as she sat in her burgundy gown, with the light catching the fabric just right, and the right people at her table, and the right man beside her. She had earned all of it. 40 minutes in, Cecilia Vance stepped to the podium. Cecilia was a trim woman in her late 50s. With silver hair she wore short, and a presence that did not require a microphone, though she used one. She thanked the table sponsors by name. She acknowledged the committee chairs, 2 of whom were at Camille's table, and the applause that followed was warm and familiar. Then she shifted, just slightly, and the room adjusted with her the way rooms do when the person at the podium is about to say something that matters. "I want to take a special moment," Cecilia said, "to recognize the Foundation's underwriting directors. These are the individuals whose private investment makes this gala possible, whose generosity funds our grant program year after year." She paused. "They are not, as a rule, people who enjoy this part of the evening." Light laughter moved through the room. Knowing laughter, the kind that meant some people in that room already understood who she was talking about. "For 3 years running," Cecilia continued, "I have asked one of our underwriting directors for permission to recognize him publicly. For 3 years, he has politely declined." Another small pause. "He is attending in person tonight for the first time. And tonight, I'm afraid, I am not accepting no." The room had gone attentive, still. "Please join me in recognizing Darius Wade of the Callaway Group and Wade Consulting, whose generosity has underwritten a significant portion of this evening, and whose infrastructure work, I am very pleased to say, is about to change this city in ways we will be talking about for a generation." The applause was not polite. It was full. It was the sound of a room that understood what it was applauding. Not a name being introduced, but a name being confirmed. And there was a meaningful difference between those two things. Camille heard the name. She did not move. She was holding her champagne glass. She did not remember picking it up. She did not set it down. She simply held it and heard the name move through the room. Darius Wade, Callaway Group, underwriting director, 3 years running, and felt something shift beneath her that she had no language for yet, because the language would require her to understand what she was hearing, and understanding was arriving slowly, and was not kind. Brett went still beside her. She felt it without looking at him. The main doors opened. Darius walked in. The suit was navy black, and it did not announce itself. It did not need to. It was the kind of garment that simply made every other suit in the room quietly aware of its own limitations. His pocket square was white. On his wrist was a watch that 2 men at Camille's table recognized on sight. She saw one of them lean toward the other, and the recognition moved across their faces with the particular quality of men who understand what a 1968 Patek Philippe means and what it says about the person wearing it. Petra walked beside him, composed, radiant, her chin level and her expression carrying the exact calm of a woman who had been waiting a long time for this particular walk across this particular room. On his other side was an older man in a well-pressed suit, who walked the way men walk when they have no performance left in them. Simply, fully, like someone who has already lived enough to know that the moment he is standing in is the real one, and requires no embellishment. Cecilia met Darius at the entrance. She took both his hands, and then pulled him into the brief, easy embrace of 2 people who have been colleagues for years, and are glad to be in the same room. An alderman came across the floor before Darius had taken 3 steps inside. A developer whose name Camille recognized, a name she had been trying to get Brett to arrange an introduction to for months, extended his hand and held it a beat longer than ceremony required. A man in a dark jacket that Camille recognized because she had seen his byline above the masthead of the city's top black business journal for years, moved toward Darius with purpose and said something close and direct. And Darius smiled and nodded, and the smile was not the smile of a man being flattered. It was the smile of a man who had expected to be asked. Beyond the main entrance, through the floor-to-ceiling panels of lobby glass, a car sat in the valet turnaround, midnight silver, low and long and composed, in the way of things that have always known their own worth. 3 guests near the window had already turned to look. One of them said something to the valet attendant, and the attendant answered, and whatever name the attendant said moved through that small cluster of people with the particular weight of information landing in the right ears. Camille looked at the car. She had never seen it before in her life. She did not know the Callaway Group. She did not know about the underwriting committee. She had not known, sitting across the breakfast table from this man for 8 years, that on the 3rd Tuesday of every month, he was somewhere she had never thought to ask about. She had not known about any of it. Not the car, not the holding company, not the 3 years of private investment in the very organization whose gala she had told him he would struggle to get into. She had not known, because she had not looked. She had made her assessment and trusted it, and built everything on top of it. Her contempt, her plans, her choices, the quiet architecture of the exit she had been constructing for 14 months, and every piece of that architecture was sitting on a foundation she had never actually examined. Darius was 20 feet away. He was speaking with the alderman and the developer, and his name was moving through the room in the warm current of genuine recognition, not the performed kind. He had not looked in her direction. Not once. Then he did. Just briefly. Just long enough. There was nothing in his expression. Not satisfaction. Not anger. Not performance of any kind. He simply saw her, clearly, completely, with the specific calm of a man who has already finished every decision that mattered. And then he turned back to his conversation, and he laughed, fully, easily, the laugh of a man who was exactly where he belonged and had always belonged, and had simply, finally, stopped being somewhere smaller. The sound of it carried. It reached her. Camille stood across the room in her burgundy gown with the champagne glass she did not remember picking up, and she watched her husband move through the crowd like a man returning to something he had never actually left. And she understood, with a cold and total clarity that no amount of composure could soften, that she had never once in 8 years known what she was married to. She came through the door at midnight. Her heels were in her hand. Her gown was perfect. She had held herself together that carefully, even in the car, even alone. But her eyes had the particular flatness of someone who has spent hours performing ease and used every last reserve doing it. Darius was in the kitchen, coffee made. The small lamp above the stove was on, leaving the rest of the room in comfortable shadow. He was in a plain gray t-shirt and sweatpants, sitting at the table with his phone face up, not looking at anything in particular. He looked up when she came in. "Hey," he said. "How'd it go?" "Good." She set her heels down by the door with careful quiet. "Long committee debrief after. You know how Cecilia runs those things?" "I do," he said. Which was true. She moved to the counter and poured herself a glass of water. Her back was to him for a moment, and she used it. Just a breath, just a second of not being watched. Then she turned around and leaned against the counter and looked at him with a smile that cost her more than he would ever know she had paid. "Good turnout," she said. "Sounds like it." She nodded. She drank her water. She went to bed. She did not sleep. She lay in the dark with her phone on her chest and read the messages the way a person reads a damage report, slowly, carefully, dreading each line and unable to stop. "Your husband. I didn't know he was involved with the foundation at all. What a wonderful surprise. Camille. Darius was just lovely tonight. You must be so proud. Just incredible that he's been quietly underwriting the program all this time. 3 years. You must have known what a special evening this would be. She had not known. That was the sentence she had been swallowing all night, and it tasted the same at midnight as it had at 8 o'clock, which was like something cold and heavy sitting in the middle of her chest with no intention of moving. The board member's message was the worst. Dr. Patricia Ennis, whose table Camille had been trying to sit at for 2 years, whose endorsement she had been quietly engineering for the better part of her career at the hospital, had sent a note at 11:15. Camille, what a night. I had such a wonderful conversation with your husband. I had no idea how deeply he was involved with the Foundation's infrastructure work, or with the Callaway Group, for that matter. Remarkable man. We should all have lunch soon. Camille read it 3 times. Patricia Ennis had spent 12 minutes talking to Darius at the reception and used the word remarkable. Camille had been working toward that lunch invitation for 2 years. She set the phone face down on the nightstand. She stared at the ceiling. At the gala, she had held herself together because she had to. Her colleagues at the donor table had turned to her with open curiosity, warm, not suspicious, and asked the kinds of questions that assumed she would have answers. How long has he been on the committee? Did you help him get involved with the foundation? Or was that separate? That car, has that been in the family long? She had smiled through every single one. She had said he was private. She had said he preferred to keep his professional work separate from her professional world. She had delivered it all with the practiced ease of a woman who manages perception for a living, and she had done it while the floor beneath her shifted inch by inch in a direction she still did not fully understand. The Callaway Group, 3 years of underwriting. The Ghost, midnight silver, long and quiet in the valet lane, that she had never seen before in her life. Cecilia Vance, holding his arm like an old friend. The watch that 2 men at her table had recognized before she'd even registered it was unusual. She turned onto her side. She looked at the faint outline of him sleeping. She had thought she knew the full accounting of who this man was. She had measured him and found him wanting, and built an entire private future on top of that measurement. And the measurement was wrong. Not slightly wrong. Not off by a margin she could recalculate and recover from. Wrong in the way of a foundation that was never where you thought it was. She closed her eyes. Sleep did not come. In the morning, he made coffee. He put hers at the angle she preferred, with the handle turned left, the same way he had done it for 8 years without being asked. She came downstairs in a robe with her phone already in her hand and sat across from him at the kitchen table and looked at him over the rim of her mug. He was reading something on his phone. Unhurried. Quiet. How'd you sleep? He asked, without looking up. Fine, she said. The word came out steady. That was all she trusted herself with this morning. One word, delivered cleanly, revealing nothing. She watched him turn a page on his phone. He looked rested. He looked, she thought, with something that had no comfortable name, exactly like a man who had slept without difficulty. She was still trying to assemble the picture, still finding edges she hadn't known existed, still reaching for pieces she didn't have. He called her at 2 in the afternoon. I found the LLC, Petra said. Her voice was level in the way it got when she was controlling something. It's registered to Brett. 4 months old. There's a lease application attached. Luxury condo, downtown, 1,200 square feet, Riverview. The application references household income figures. A pause. Combined household. Darius was quiet for a moment. Keep going, he said. I will. Another pause. Darius, I'm going to find all of it. I know, he said. That's why I called you first. He set the phone down on his desk. He reached for the legal pad. At the top of a clean page he wrote a date. the day of the phone call in the hallway, and drew a line across the paper beneath it. Then he began to build the columns: names, dates, amounts, points of contact. The same process he used when he sat down with a structural assessment and needed to find every place a load had been distributed wrong. He worked in silence. The afternoon light moved across the desk. He did not stop writing for a long time. Petra arrived at 11 with the 2 folders tucked under her arm and a coffee she hadn't touched. She closed the office door behind her. She did not sit down right away. She just stood there for a moment, looking at him, and something in her face told him, before she opened either folder, that what she had found was worse than what he'd prepared for. "I've got everything," she said. She sat. She put the first folder on the desk and slid it toward him. He read it the way he read structural reports, front to back. Nothing skipped, nothing assumed. The LLC was 4 months old, registered to Brett Holloway. The managing address was a law office on the north side of downtown. The lease agreement was attached behind it. 1,200 square feet, Riverview, a building Darius had actually consulted on 3 years ago during a foundation assessment. He knew exactly how much those units cost. He turned to the financial disclosure page on the lease application. He read the income figures. He read them again. They were not Camille's hospital salary. He knew her salary. He had known it for years, had watched it grow, had been quietly proud of what she'd built. These figures were larger. These were the figures that only appeared when you combined 2 incomes, when you filled out a joint return and reported a household. His income, the income from the work she called insufficient, the income of the man she told her lover she had settled for, used to pass a credit check for another man's apartment. He closed the folder. He set it on the desk carefully, the way he set down things that mattered. "She used your earnings to qualify the lease," Petra said. "Brett couldn't clear it on his own. His firm's billing review was already creating irregularities on his financials, so the application used the combined household profile." She paused. "Your name isn't on it, but your money is in it." The room was quiet. "Okay," he said. Just that. Petra watched him for a moment. Then she reached for the second folder. "I found something else while I was running the financial research." She opened it and turned it toward him. A property database printout. The Callaway Group name, highlighted in yellow, appearing 3 times across 2 pages. "You're in the public record through the property holdings. Not obviously, not if you don't know what you're looking at. But if someone were doing a deep pull on the financial ecosystem around your firm, it surfaces." She folded her hands on the desk. How much does she actually know? About the Callaway Group? About any of it? He looked at the printout for a moment. Then he leaned back in his chair. "She knows I run the firm," he said. "She knows we live well. She knows I drive a sensible car and come home at a reasonable hour and show up to the things she asks me to show up to." He paused. "She has never asked a single question that would have led her anywhere else. Not once in 8 years." Petra was quiet. "I would have shown her," he said. "It came out even. Factual. Any of it. All of it. She never asked." "I know," Petra said softly. She had already made her assessment. She measured me against whatever standard she was using, and she wrote the number down, and she never went back to check her work. He looked at the folder. "She used the surface of what I built to fund a plan to leave it, and she never once thought to look at what was underneath because she had already decided there was nothing there worth looking for. That was the thing. Not the affair, not the LLC, not the income figures on the lease application. All of that was injury, real, documentable, actionable. But this was something different. This was the specific grief of being married to someone who never tried to know you, who looked at the visible portion of your life and concluded it was all there was, and stopped looking. He had been here. He had been available. He would have answered anything she asked. She never asked, Uncle Ray's porch light was on when Darius pulled up. The old man was already outside, coffee in hand, like he'd been waiting without needing to be told. Darius sat beside him and laid out the full picture. The phone call, the LLC, the income figures, the condo. All of it, in order, without editorializing. Uncle Ray listened the way he always listened, still and fully present, not filling silence. When Darius finished, Ray sat with it for a while. "You loved her through all of it," he said finally. "Every morning, every dinner, every one of those days when she was already somewhere else in her head, and you were still there, still showing up." He looked at Darius. "You loved her while she was doing all of it." Darius didn't answer, because the answer was yes, and they both knew it. "I'm going to set it down," Darius said. Uncle Ray reached over and put one hand on his shoulder, heavy and sure. "I know, son," he said. "I've been waiting on you two." He pulled into the driveway at 9:30. He put the SUV in park and cut the engine and sat in the quiet for a moment. Not thinking, not planning, just sitting in the dark with the shape of a decision that had already been made. He was done grieving. Everything from this point forward was architecture. He got out of the car and went inside. The call came in on a Tuesday, Wade Consulting's main line. A legal firm, the receptionist said. A man named Brett Holloway, asking to speak with Darius about a potential referral arrangement. He had clients in commercial construction, he said, and wanted to explore whether the firms might be useful to each other. Darius took the call himself. "Mr. Holloway," he said, "I'd be happy to meet." They agreed on Thursday. A coffee shop downtown, neutral ground, 11 in the morning. Brett suggested the place. Darius knew it. A polished spot with exposed brick and leather chairs, the kind of room where attorneys took meetings they wanted to feel informal without actually being informal. He had driven past it 100 times and never gone in. He went in Thursday at 5 to 11. Brett was already there. Of course he was. A man who arrived early to establish possession of the room. He stood when Darius approached, hand extended, smile already loaded. He was tall, well-fitted in a charcoal blazer and open collar, the kind of put-together that said, "I didn't try very hard in a way that required considerable effort." Darius, Brett Holloway, great to finally connect. Finally, as if there had been a mutual anticipation, as if they were simply two professionals whose schedules had not yet aligned. "Brett?" Darius shook his hand. "Firm? Easy. No reading of the room. Good to meet you." They sat. They ordered. Brett moved into the conversation, the way a man moves into a room he considers his, smoothly, with the specific ease of someone who has never once doubted his right to occupy space. He talked about his practice, mentioned a few client names, real estate developers and general contractors, the kind of name-dropping that was calibrated to inform rather than impress. He asked Darius about Wade Consulting with the bright surface interest of a man conducting an assessment he had already completed. He had looked Darius up. That was clear. He knew about the firm, knew the project history, knew enough to ask intelligent questions. What he had concluded from the research was equally clear. A solid professional, comfortably successful, the kind of man whose life was contained in what was publicly visible. He had found the firm. He had not found the Callaway Group. He had not looked far enough, or he had looked and not known what he was looking at. Either way, he was sitting across from Darius Wade with the quiet confidence of a man who believes he understands the complete picture. Darius let him believe it. He was warm. Genuinely so. It cost him nothing to be warm to a man he had already documented. He asked questions the way he asked questions on a site walk. The kind that sounded like conversation but were actually measurements. Brett's client base. The structure of the referral relationships he was describing. How long he had been on the Harrington Foundation's philanthropic committee. He asked that one casually, almost as an aside, Watching Brett's face for the fraction of a second recalibration that a man makes when a conversation steps briefly onto ground he was not expecting. There it was, small, gone, almost immediately. "About 2 years," Brett said, smooth. "Great organization. You have any involvement with them?" "Some," Darius said. He picked up his coffee. "Good work, they do." Brett nodded and moved on and did not ask the follow-up question. He did not ask because he had already decided there was no reason to. He was here to assess a rival, and the rival had been assessed, and the assessment was no threat. The man across from him was pleasant, well-spoken, thoroughly absorbed in his work, and showing no sign whatsoever that anything in his world was out of order. Brett settled deeper into his chair and talked about the referral arrangement with genuine enthusiasm. He was, Darius noted, a skilled conversationalist. He could hold a room, build rapport, make a person feel seen. These were real skills. They were also the only layer he had. And Darius had been reading structures long enough to know the difference between a load-bearing wall and a facade. They shook hands outside on the sidewalk 40 minutes later. Brett's grip was confident. His smile was the smile of a man who had just confirmed something he already believed. "Really glad we did this," he said. "I'll have my assistant send over some framework language for the referral structure. Take a look when you get a chance." "I will," Darius said. "Safe drive." He watched Brett walk to his car, a black Mercedes, current model. The kind of car you leased when you needed the symbol more than the asset. He watched him get in, watched him pull out his phone before he'd even started the engine. Across town, Camille was between meetings when Brett's message arrived. She read it in the hallway outside the conference room, one hand on the door she hadn't pushed open yet. "Just had coffee with your husband. Good guy, completely in the dark. We're fine." She exhaled. She read it once more. Then she put the phone in her jacket pocket and pushed through the door. She had her own calculation running, separate from Brett's, more precise. She had met with her attorney 10 days ago, a preliminary consultation, discreet, billed to a personal account Brett didn't know about. The attorney had walked her through the framework of a dissolution filing. Timing, she had been told, was significant. The municipal infrastructure contract Darius was up for, a project the size of which would represent the largest single payout in Wade Consulting's history, was expected to be awarded and announced within 6 to 8 weeks. Filed before the announcement, and the contract's anticipated value was theoretical. File after, and it was documented, public, and calculable. She intended to file after. She would be patient. She had been patient for 14 months. Another 6 weeks was nothing. She told Brett as much that evening, on a call she kept short and quiet. "I want the timing right," she said. "Once the contract announcement is public, we move." Brett agreed, because Brett always agreed with her when she was being strategic. It was one of the things she had decided she valued in him. She went to bed that night feeling, for the first time in weeks, that things were proceeding on her timeline, that she was the one with the plan, that she was the one who was ahead. Darius got back to the office at noon. He set his jacket over his chair, sat down, and picked up his phone. His attorney answered on the second ring. "Marcus," he said, "I need the filing accelerated. I want papers submitted before the end of the week." He called her on a Wednesday morning. He had her number from the investigative trail Petra had helped him build, a name that kept surfacing at the edges of the LLC documentation, attached to a separate set of legal proceedings that were quiet but moving. He did not use an intermediary. He dialed directly. She picked up on the third ring. "Mrs. Holloway," he said. "My name is Darius Wade. I believe we have some people in common, and I think it would be worth—" "When and where?" she said. Not a question. A response. Clean and immediate. The way a person responds when they have been waiting for a call they knew was eventually coming. They agreed on a restaurant near the financial district. Quiet, mid-range, The kind of place where two people could sit across from each other and speak plainly without anyone paying attention. 1 o'clock. That same afternoon, Margaret Holloway was already seated when he arrived. She was composed in the way of a woman who had decided, some time ago, that she was finished with the version of herself that fell apart in public. Late 40s in presentation, though he knew she was 43. Dark blazer, minimal jewelry, a glass of water she had been working through for however long she'd been there. A leather portfolio sat on the table beside her plate. She had come prepared. She stood when he approached. They shook hands. Her grip was steady, and her eyes were direct. The eyes of a woman who had spent 6 months looking at documents and had made her peace with everything they contained. "Mr. Wade," she said. "Darius," he said. "Please." They sat. They did not bother with the warm-up that strangers usually needed. There was no social circling. They had arrived at the same table from different directions, and they both knew it, and pretending otherwise would have been a waste of time that neither of them had the patience for. "How long have you known?" she asked. "The affair? About 2 weeks." He set his hands flat on the table. "The full scope of it? Less than that." She nodded slowly. "I've had an investigator working for 6 months." She opened the leather portfolio. What she put on the table was thorough in the way that only arrives from disciplined, patient documentation. Photographs, financial records, time-stamped transaction logs. A complete accounting of the LLC's activity, not just the lease, not just the condo, but the account's full history, including a series of incoming transfers that did not correspond to any legitimate client billing structure. Her investigator had cross-referenced them against Brett's firm's public filing records. The numbers did not reconcile. The explanation, her attorney had concluded, was that Brett had been holding client funds inside the LLC, routing them through it, sitting on them, moving them when it suited him. "That's not a personal failing," Margaret said, sliding a specific set of pages across to him. "That's a bar complaint, potentially a criminal matter." Darius read carefully. He turned each page with the deliberate patience of a man who understood that the details were where everything lived. Then he reached the account opening documentation. He found it in the section requesting a business associate's information. The signature was neat and slanted slightly to the right. The name beneath it was printed clearly in the required block letters. Camille A. Wade. He read it twice. He set the page down. "She signed as a business associate," Margaret said. Her voice held no particular satisfaction. It was simply factual, the tone of a woman reading from a record she had memorized. Whether she understood the full nature of what she was signing is something I genuinely can't tell you. What I can tell you is that her name is in that documentation, and when a formal review opens, and it will open, her name will require an explanation. Darius was quiet for a moment. He thought about the woman asleep in the next room while he had lain in the dark and sequenced everything. He thought about her telling Brett that she had settled, that he embarrassed her, that she was done pretending. He thought about her name on a document she may or may not have read carefully, attached to a financial structure she may or may not have fully understood, in service of a life she had been building on top of the one he thought they shared. "She's not the architect," he said. "No," Margaret agreed, "but she's listed in the building." They looked at each other across the table. Two people who had been carrying weight that was never theirs to carry. Two people who had arrived at the same cold, clear place through different roads, and were now, very simply, done. "What do you want from this?" he asked. Margaret picked up her water glass. She held it a moment before answering. "Everything he built while I was funding it," she said. "The equity, the assets, the return on a decade of my life that went into a practice with his name on the door." She set the glass down. "And I want to be in the room when he finds out who took it." Darius nodded. "Then we do it simultaneously. No gaps between filings, no window for either of them to warn the other." "Agreed. I'll have my attorney contact yours by end of day tomorrow." "Mine is already ready," she said. They shook hands across the table. No drama in it. Just two patient people closing the distance between preparation and execution. He drove home in the early evening and entered the house quietly. Camille's car was in the driveway. He could hear the television from the other room. He went directly to his office and closed the door. He spread every folder across the desk. The LLC documentation, the lease application, the combined financial disclosures, Margaret's investigative records, the account opening paperwork with Camille's signature in the business associate section, the preliminary divorce filing Marcus had submitted 2 days ago, the billing review correspondence from Brett's firm. All of it, laid flat, edge to edge, the complete architecture of what had been built and what was about to come down. He read through it one final time, not looking for anything new, just confirming, the way he confirmed measurements before a pour. Because the work you do in the quiet, before the moment, is the work that makes the moment hold. Then he stacked it, each folder, neatly, in the order they would matter. He tapped the edges square. He unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk and placed the stack inside. He turned the key. He put the key in his jacket pocket. He was ready. The morning came in gray and quiet. Darius was up before 6. He moved through the kitchen with the same unhurried routine he had kept for 8 years. The cast iron pan on the back burner, eggs cracked and beaten, bread in the toaster. He set Camille's coffee mug at the angle she preferred, handle turned slightly left, the way she liked to find it without having to adjust. He had done this so many times the motion was purely automatic. His hands moved. His mind was somewhere else entirely. He heard her on the stairs at 7:15. She came into the kitchen in her work clothes, already composed, already inside the version of herself she showed the world. She poured the coffee, wrapped both hands around the mug, and looked out the window at the yard. "Smells good," she said. "Eggs are on the counter," he said. She picked up her plate. She ate standing, phone in her other hand, scrolling through whatever her morning required. He sat at the table and drank his coffee, and watched the yard, and said nothing that mattered. When she set the plate in the sink and reached for her bag, he spoke. "Be home tonight," he said. Calm, level. The voice he used on job sites when he was giving an instruction that wasn't a suggestion. "I'd like to talk." Nothing urgent. She paused for half a second. Just half. Then she smiled the way she smiled when things were easy and manageable and entirely under control. "Sure," she said. "I'll be home by 7. She left. He listened to the car back out of the driveway. He listened until the sound of the engine was gone. Then he washed the pan. He dried it. He hung it back on the rack. He went to his office and worked for the rest of the day. And his hands were steady. And the hours passed the way hours passed when you had already decided everything and were simply waiting for the clock. She arrived at 6:54. He heard the door. He heard her set her bag down in the foyer, the familiar soft thud of it against the bench. He heard her heels on the hardwood coming toward the living room, and then the heels stopped. He was seated. 2 glasses of water on the table between the chairs. No candles, no ambient music, just the room and the chairs, and the last of the evening light coming through the front window. She saw his face. She stopped moving. Something shifted in her expression. Not fear exactly, but the moment just before recognition, when the body understands what the mind hasn't finished processing yet. "Sit down, Camille," he said. She sat. He did not ease into it. There was nothing to ease into. 4 days before the gala, he said, "I came home early. A client call canceled. I set my bag in the foyer and heard your voice from the sitting room." He held her eyes. "You didn't know I was there. I stood in the hallway for a long time." She went very still. "You said, and I want to be exact, because I've had time to make sure I remember correctly. You said, 'He embarrasses me. He always has.'" I settled. You said you spent 8 years managing how people saw me in rooms that mattered. You said you were 29 and scared and I was stable, and that you settled, and that you were done pretending otherwise. He paused. I was standing 12 feet away. The color drained from her face slowly, the way heat leaves a room. She opened her mouth. He continued. He reached into the folder on the side table and placed the first document on the coffee table between them. The Meridian Hotel receipt. Room 412. 14 months ago. It started at least 14 months before that phone call, he said. Probably before the receipt. But that's where the paper begins. He placed the next document. The LLC registration. Brett's name as managing member. He set up an LLC 4 months ago. He placed the lease agreement on top of it. It holds the lease on a downtown luxury condo. He placed the financial disclosure summary. The lease application included combined household income figures, not your salary alone. Our joint filing profile. He held her eyes. My income helped give him an apartment. She did not reach for a single document. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and stared at the table. He placed the account opening paperwork last. He turned it so she could read it. Your name is in the business associate section, he said. Your signature. Whether you understood what you were signing, that's a conversation for your attorney. But your name is there, and a formal billing review opened at his firm this week. When it moves, and it's already moving, your association creates exposure. He let that sit. Make that call before anything else. She was looking at the documents now, not reading them, just seeing them. He reached to the folder one final time. He slid the divorce filing across the table. Single document, clean and flat. The timestamp visible in the top right corner. She looked at it. 3 weeks ago. She looked at him. She had told her attorney she wanted to wait until after the municipal contract announcement. She had a strategy. A timeline. You already filed, she said. Her voice was barely above a level tone. 3 weeks ago, he said. The room held that for a long moment. Then he stood. The Callaway Group has existed since before we married, he said. The trust, the real estate portfolio, the full picture. I would have shown you any of it, all of it, if you had ever asked. Not once in 8 years did you ask. He picked up his water glass. Not because I hid it, because you had already decided what I was worth and never saw a reason to look closer. He walked to his office. He closed the door. Camille sat alone at the table. The documents were spread in front of her. The receipt, the LLC, the lease, the financial disclosures, her own signature on a page she may or may not have read carefully. The divorce filing with its timestamp that told her, without ambiguity, that the man she had been outmaneuvering had filed 9 days before she ever sat down with her attorney. She had believed she was the one who was ahead. She sat with the full weight of that understanding and did not move, and the evening light finished leaving the room, and the house went quiet around her. Camille was gone before 8. Darius knew because he had left before 6. He drove to the office in the dark with the heat running low and the radio off, and by the time the city was waking up, he was already at his desk with coffee and a site assessment that needed his attention. He gave it his full attention. That was all there was to do now. He had left her space and a timeline. She had until Friday. Whatever she did with the hours between those 4 walls was no longer his to witness or carry. The first thing that came apart was Brett. Margaret submitted her documentation to the firm's senior partners on a Tuesday morning. Not a leak. Not an anonymous tip. A full, organized, forensically assembled package delivered by her attorney to the managing partner's office at 9 a.m. sharp. By Thursday afternoon, Brett Holloway was on administrative leave. The LLC was frozen that same day. The downtown condo lease, the one with the combined household income figures on the application, the one Darius's earnings had helped put a roof over, was voided within the week. Brett's name began moving through the legal community in the particular quiet current that everyone in that world recognizes and nobody announces. The current that means, this one isn't coming back from it clean. Margaret's divorce filing landed simultaneously. It was the most thorough document her attorney had ever produced, and he had been practicing for 30 years. Every asset, every account. Every year she had managed his calendar, organized his client dinners, and built the social infrastructure that his practice stood on. All of it mapped, all of it quantified, the vacation property, the retirement accounts, his equity stake in the practice she had supported, while he was still building it into something worth having a stake in. Brett called Camille 7 times in 3 days. She did not answer. On the 8th call, she picked up. She said, "I have my own attorney. Don't contact me again." She hung up. That was the last conversation they ever had. Whatever they had built together, 14 months of stolen evenings and borrowed futures, and the particular lie that he was an upgrade, ended on a disconnected line with 8 unanswered calls as its monument. Camille's professional life came apart more slowly, but no less completely. The divorce moved on Darius's timeline because he had filed first and prepared the longest. The marital home, purchased with his income over the course of their marriage, was clearly and structurally his. The Callaway Group assets, established before the wedding, maintained entirely separately, never commingled, had never been marital property. Her attorney reviewed the structure twice and found nothing viable to challenge. There was no angle. There was no thread to pull. It had all been built correctly, years before she ever decided what it was worth. The hospital board convened a conflict of interest review 3 weeks after the divorce filing became public record. The issue was straightforward. Brett's firm had made significant donations to Camille's capital campaign. During the same period, the LLC was established, and her name appeared in its account opening documentation. The review was not a prosecution. It was an inquiry, but an inquiry is thorough by nature, and thoroughness was sufficient. Camille resigned before the findings were formalized. She framed it as a voluntary transition. She told the people she needed to tell that she was pursuing new opportunities in healthcare administration, and that the timing felt right. She delivered every line with the composure of a woman who had spent years managing how things looked. Right up until the moment the thing she was managing was herself. She was not criminally charged. Her involvement lacked the demonstrable intent required. But the professional standing she had chosen over her marriage did not survive. The social position she had spent 8 years curating did not survive. The identity she had built inside a world that valued polish and access and adjacency to power. That identity required a foundation, and the foundation was gone. She landed at a medical billing company across town. A smaller role, a quieter office, a life that was the precise downstream consequence of every choice she had made, with the confidence of someone who believed she was the one who... The municipal infrastructure contract was awarded and announced in the city's business journal on a Thursday morning. Darius's photograph ran with the piece, not a posed portrait, but a job site photograph Petra had suggested. Darius in a hard hat beside the project's first marked coordinates, looking at something outside the frame with the focused expression of a man who already knows what he's building. The Harrington Foundation announced its largest grant cycle in its history the following week. The Callaway Group was listed among the primary underwriters. Cecilia Vance sent a handwritten note. Darius framed it and hung it in the office next to a photograph of himself and Uncle Ray at the ribbon cutting of his first completed project. 2 men standing in front of something they both knew the cost of. 2 additional cities with active infrastructure initiatives reached out within the month. Petra handled the responses with the precision she brought to everything. Lisbon was everything he had known it would be, and had spent years not allowing himself. He had put the trip on his calendar the week the divorce was finalized. He had booked the flight and the apartment and the terrace cafe he had read about in an engineering magazine 3 years ago, and he had not second-guessed any of it once. The ghost was in the garage of the house, his house, without qualification or asterisk, or the ambient awareness that someone else had a claim on what he had built. He had driven it to the airport and handed the key to the valet without calculating what it communicated or adjusting for who might see it. He was past the adjusting. He was past the editing. He had put all of that down the same night he sat on the hood of that car in a dark storage unit and decided he was finished being a smaller version of himself for an audience that had never deserved the performance. Petra was officially co-principal. The title had been accurate for years. Now it was on the letterhead, on the door. On the business cards, she kept insisting were unnecessary because everyone already knew, to which Darius had said simply, "Some things should be on the record." Uncle Ray had a standing weekly lunch at the office. He sat in the chair by the window, the good chair, the one with the view of the street, and he was brought coffee in a real ceramic mug by staff who had been told truthfully that he was the reason the firm existed. He received this with the satisfaction of a man who had been waiting a long time to see the right ending, find the right person. On the 5th morning in Lisbon, Darius was at the Terrace Cafe with his espresso and his engineering notebook when his phone buzzed on the table. Petra, National Infrastructure Trade Publication, wants to run a feature on the municipal project. Full spread. How much do you want me to share? He read it once. He set the phone down. He looked out at the water, the way it moved, easy and indifferent, going where it went without asking permission. He thought about a storage unit on the east side of a city, a car under a gray tarp, a man who had kept an entire world quietly in a register his wife never thought to look at. Not because he was ashamed of it, but because his grandfather had taught him that what you have is for you. You show people what you do. The rest is between you and God and your accountant. He picked the phone back up and typed, "Tell them everything that's true. I'm done keeping things in storage." He set the phone face down on the table. He picked up his pencil. He looked out at the water for one long, unhurried moment. Then he opened the notebook to a fresh page and began to sketch the layout of the firm's second office, thinking about windows, about how light should move through a space where serious work gets done, about how a room should feel when the people inside it know they are exactly where they are supposed to be. He was building again, and this time there was nothing left in storage. No compartment, no tarp, no version of himself waiting in the dark to be uncovered. Everything he was already out in the open. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.